Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the Pak-U.S. relations. Now a couple of developments in that regard, also a statement from the spokesperson Ted Price. Also Ted Price said that Pakistan is not only seen through the prism of Afghanistan, rather it has a lot of importance for United States of America, and we really look forward for better relationship with Pakistan. Now interestingly, a lot has developed, and there was a statement by the President of U.S. and he also said that, well, a couple of very important points he raised, that A, Taliban, they are not in a position to take over Kabul, and secondly, the Afghan forces have been prepared enough to tackle the Taliban issue. Now let's see where it leads. A lot of people do not agree with Mr. Joe Biden, but since he is the President of the United States of America, so one has to consider what he says. Now before any further details, or before I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch it.
Pakistan always remained tested ally in all the strategic utilities of the United States in South Asia, specifically in Afghanistan. However, despite Pakistan stood steadily as the frontline warrior in the United States waged a global war on terror and paid a heavy price for this, the United States always remained critical of Pakistan's efforts and demoralized the respective sacrifices. The United States, which is carrying out a face-saving exit after losing a two-decade war in Afghanistan, finally realized that without the support of Pakistan, who always remained a proponent of peaceful Afghanistan and discouraged taking any sides, is vital for retaining its future hegemonic writ in South Asia. The realization was seen in a recent statement of the United States State Department spokesperson Ted Price, who said that Pakistan is an important partner in various fronts and both the countries have shared interests in peace and stability in Afghanistan. However, Pakistan now treading away from supporting unilateralism and engaging in the interdependent social, economic and political peculiarities with China has already declined to be a partner of conflict with the United States. This stance was echoed in Prime Minister Imran Khan's statement that the state will not allow any bases and use of its territory for any sort of action inside Afghanistan.
Now that tells you the story of the current happenings, but there is another very interesting soundbite of the President of the United States of America. Let's hear it out.
In Afghanistan will conclude on August 31st. The drawdown is proceeding in a secure and orderly way, prioritizing the safety of our troops as they depart. Our military commanders advised me that once I made the decision to end the war, we needed to move swiftly to conduct the main elements of the drawdown. And in this context, speed is safety. As I said in April, the United States did what we went to do in Afghanistan, to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 and deliver justice to Osama bin Laden, and to degrade the terrorist threat to keep Afghanistan from becoming a base from which attacks could be continued against the United States. We achieved those objectives. That's why we went. We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country. The Afghan troops have 300,000 well equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Taliban, Mr. President, do you trust the Taliban, sir?
Is that a serious question?
It's absolutely a serious question. Do you trust the Taliban?
No, I do not. The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place. The question is, will they generate the kind of cohesion to do it?
Will the United States be responsible for the loss of Afghan civilian lives that could happen after the military exit?
No. It's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide on what government they want, not us to impose the government on them.
A mission accomplished moment? What is it in
No,
your view?
there's no mission accomplished. The mission was accomplished in that we got Osama bin Laden, and terrorism is not emanating from that part of the world. Our military mission in Afghanistan will conclude on August 30th.
Well, a very interesting interview of the President of United States, Mr. Joe Biden, and I'll just focus on a couple of points that he has raised. And perhaps that is going to be the main feature of our today's show. Let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood Saab, who is a senior analyst, writer, and is also an author. Sir, thank you so much, General Saab, for your time, sir. You took your time out and you are a part of our show. And we also have with us Shahid Raza Saab. He's the director, CDAT, SASSI. Thank you so much, Asab, for your time as well. And on the telephone, we'll be talking to Michael Kugelman, who's a political commentator and the Deputy Director for Asia Program, and is a senior associate with the Wilson Center. Now, General Saab, 5 important areas. I might totally disagree with what the US President just said in his soundbite, but I want your comments. Since you've been observing the situation, you have seen the USSR invasion, now the American invasion. The President says that they have achieved all the objectives, number one. Then he says the nation building is not our 100% job, but perhaps it should be done by the Afghan people and the Afghan government, and they are responsible for their own future. So kind of shying away from the actual objective. And number 3, he says that, well, the Afghan forces are very well equipped, very well trained. Their number is over 300,000, and they can look after the affairs of the Taliban, who are just 75,000. And then the most important part, he says that the Afghan government has the capacity to stay in power. Now, would you like to comment one by one? Let's start off from the objectives the Americans had when they invaded Afghanistan almost 20 years ago. Do you think they have achieved those objectives, General Saab?
Well, I think their objectives were very ambitious in the beginning, and they wanted to in fact transform Afghanistan's complete culture, their way of thinking, education, economy, and sort of do a transformational job for Afghanistan. This was their initial sort of a plan, which was ridiculous in a way. And at the same time, they were trying to sort of ensure that peace is also established in Afghanistan. So none of, firstly, their plan was so ambitious and ridiculous that it was unachievable. But nonetheless, I think what he's saying is just in order to sort of save a face, what they call face saving.
Correct.
Apart from that, it is nothing else, because what have they achieved in terms, as far as I can see, there is not much difference between when the Soviet Union left and what the Americans are leaving, except that the Americans did not get such a bad they were not mauled as the Soviets were. But apart from the fact, the conditions in Afghanistan are as bad as they were at that point of time. So from that angle, I would say that there is not much difference between the two. So there fundamentally, Afghanistan is still so chaotic and is unable to govern itself. There are various factions which are fighting. The Taliban are really very powerful, component of the Afghan society today. They are more or less dominating militarily as well. So I think they had gone there to establish democracy. They had gone there to establish peace and security. All that, in all these objectives, they have failed.
They have failed, right? So basically, this whole episode of the last 20 years could not yield any
No.
productive results.
Yeah.
And now, sir, another important point, because that was also raised. General Saab, since you were serving in the military when USSR invaded Afghanistan. Now, General Saab, tell us about the difference when Mikhail Gorbachev decided to withdraw his forces from Afghanistan, and again Joe Biden decided. So the current situation in Afghanistan, once the forces have left, and then the USSR forces when they left, what was the difference, sir? I mean, Taliban seem to be much stronger at the moment, sir, despite whatever the claims have been made by the US president. That's a separate chapter. But do you believe that it's almost the same parallel equation now even?
You see, the difference is if you can really go for minor things, well, not minor things, certain aspects. When the Soviets withdrew, the Soviet Union collapsed. One of the major happenings in the Soviet Union was that it could not, this triggered off the failure in Afghanistan. It had such a shock effect in the country that it triggered off the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it would have happened in any case, the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it was accelerated, and the process in Afghanistan accelerated that. As far as America was concerned, that was not the problem. The problem was that they had come here to create a democratic Afghanistan. They had come here to establish peace in Afghanistan. They had come here to establish their influence in Afghanistan. They had come here to sort of dominate this region. In all these aspects, they have failed.
All right, now coming to you, Shahid, now another important factor. Forget about the nation building, because we all know the money they've spent. Almost 60–70% of the money has gone back in various forms. But now they believe that the Afghan people should decide about the future. So what if the Afghan people opt for the Taliban? So that means that they particularly came in to eliminate the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda element. Over here you have strengthened them. There are more non-state actors in Afghanistan present with a lot of strength, supported by so many intelligence agencies. And basically what Afghanistan was prior to 9/11, right now it's a very different equation altogether. It seems that the objectives, they've totally failed in achieving those, but it's the other way around now.
Absolutely. Okay, if you look at this situation, it's quite interesting. When you hear the American president saying that it is up to the Afghan people to decide their future and to take the country forward, to me it sounds more like an admission of defeat and a paralysis of policy in Washington. Because it kind of speaks to the international community that the American government is absolving itself of the responsibility to maintain peace and stability in Afghanistan. So I think, as you've stated, that if it came down to the Afghan people, would they vote for Ashraf Ghani? I don't think so, because a vast majority of the Afghan people, they see Ashraf Ghani and his predecessor, Mr. Karzai, as
aliens. Let's be very honest.
Yeah, let's be
outsiders.
Honest. As outsiders, they have absolutely no legitimacy, which is why they have not been able to succeed militarily on the battlefield. So let me take you back to what the President Joe Biden has stated regarding the figures of the Afghan National Army. You have to realize that a large number of Afghan National Army are not being paid. They are not getting salaries. So they are surrendering to the Taliban and switching sides. So Taliban's numbers are actually increasing. And over the past...
According to the US president, the number of Afghan Taliban is around 75,000.
But that is an unofficial number. There's no verifiable statistic that would say that. But he also mentioned 300,000 Afghan National Army. Afghan National Army is a rebranded Northern Alliance militia that the US inherited when it invaded Afghanistan. So it basically tied up with the nemesis of the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, and they kind of transformed it into the Afghan National Army. It does not actually represent the entire national character of Afghanistan, and it doesn't enjoy sovereignty and legitimacy over Afghan territory, which is why it's been failing on the ground. He also mentioned about the Afghan Air Force, which doesn't have any fighter aircraft. They only have some very small number of propeller aircrafts. They have stated today that they will be sending 30 Black Hawk helicopters, but at the same time they have admitted that Afghan Air Force is incapable of flying those aircrafts and maintaining those aircrafts.
Because that's a very technical machine.
Yeah, they will have a very limited impact on the battlefield itself. If you look at the facts, during the last 20 days, let's say during the last 1 month, the Taliban have taken over 80 strategic districts. Most of those cities are located very strategically close to the provincial headquarters, the provincial cities, capital cities. So the Taliban are in a position to take over provincial capitals if they need to. And another important piece of news is that they have been able to take over border crossings with 3 of Afghanistan's neighbors, Tajikistan, with Pakistan and Uzbekistan, Pakistan, and Iran. So that kind of tells you the evolving situation that is happening. And to me, this particular press conference by President Joe Biden is more of an act of desperation.
Now, another very important area, and that is about the kind of input or the information that is fed to the president. I think when he says that the Afghan military is well capable of looking after their affairs and defending their country against the Taliban, I fail to understand how come he is saying that. And secondly, when he says that they're well equipped and well trained also. So they could be well equipped because the American assets are with them. But having said that, when you talk about the training, I mean, there's a difference. I mean, people used to make fun of them when they used to see them doing parade, or for that matter, even the American soldiers, you would laugh what exactly is going on. And my point is that military training is a different ball game. And you just can't erect an army like that, hire some people from here, some from the Northern Alliance, end up having a certain number, give them guns, make them stand in the formation and consider them as a legitimate army to fight against one of the battle-hardened groups in the world. So that seems to be absolutely incorrect, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, look, if you look at the Afghan National Army, the strategy of NATO, because it's been raised by NATO, in the beginning when the American troop surge happened under Obama, a lot of the military operations were being carried out by the NATO forces themselves. But then they slowly transitioned those operations to the Afghan National Army.
Correct.
They carried out, they conducted some, red unit operations. These are zero units that have been associated with gross human rights abuses against their own people. So they are very unpopular. And as far as the Afghan National Army's capabilities and training is concerned, I think General Talat will be better suited to answer this question. But I would say this: the Afghan National Army is not capable of defending Afghanistan's sovereignty. If it was, it was probably more suited to do so while it had complete support of the NATO forces. It enjoyed air support from the NATO air forces. It had other,
They had a huge number of foreign forces,
and
yes.
when it was at its most strength when the NATO was there. So it was not able to make any impact on the battlefield while it was supported by NATO. And while now that the NATO has left, they don't have air support. Americans have stated that they will not be providing air support to the Afghan government, the Afghan National Army. I don't really think that they can make much of a difference on the battlefield, and that kind of speaks to the fact that a large number of Afghan National Army soldiers in the theater of operations are actually surrendering to the Taliban and not the other way around. So I think overall, I would tend to disagree with the President's statement regarding ANA being able to defend Afghanistan's sovereignty. It would be a lucky charm if they can actually defend Kabul itself rather than the entire country, because they are retreating from major hotspots as Taliban are taking over the country so rapidly, and they're taking over strategic locations of Afghanistan. And one thing that I would like to mention here, that the most strategic asset in Afghanistan is the Afghan Ring Road, and that is exactly what happened in the Soviet-Afghan War. So if you have to choke Kabul, you have to take over the Afghan Ring Road, and if you do so successfully, it will put the Western-backed government in Kabul under so much pressure.
They would be practically under a siege.
They will definitely be under a siege very soon.
Now, Jalal Saab, another very important area, and that is about the concept. They wanted democracy to be there. They failed. Nation building, forget about it. So, but there were a couple of Indian channels, and they were, I mean, all those anchors and their analysts, they seem to be very worried. And they were saying, well, the Indians have spent over perhaps few said $3.25 billion, and they have constructed roads, they have made libraries, schools, colleges, universities, even the parliament, and so on and so forth. Now, sir, their future, about their investments, the kind of perception they had earlier, now it is believed that there are 3,106 members of the Indian either they are the diplomats or they are from RAW, and God knows, but it's still a huge number, and they want to vacate Afghanistan. That means that there is something for them to worry about, number one. And secondly, sir, when you see that the Indians, I mean, they are also shaking at the moment, that they had no clue that this is going to happen, but so rapidly, perhaps they had no clue. And secondly, sir, when you look at the current movement of the Taliban, yes, they are looking after the affairs in the southern side also, in the western side also, but the most important is towards the north, bordering Uzbekistan or Tajikistan for that matter, areas like Kunduz, or perhaps the bordering area of Tajikistan, and almost 3,000 of the Afghan soldiers, they fled into Tajikistan, and now the Taliban, they have announced that the Russians will be looking after the affairs there on the upper side, and perhaps there's some sort of an engagement between the Taliban and the Russians, they've opened up their one of the military setup there as well, sir, and perhaps the Air Force setup, and also they have told them to go back to their country. So the Afghan soldiers, they have been sent back. What does that tell us, sir? Things really changing rapidly?
Well, there is no doubt about it. I think the whole profile of Afghanistan, or the whole scenario, is going to change. It will be obviously dominated by the Taliban, and all the vestiges of the previous government will disappear. And so I think there are no two opinions about that. The fact is, to what extent there will be so much of chaos in Afghanistan, that is a fundamental point.
Civil war or just chaos, sir?
Well, I mean, it is not only chaos, the whole economy, there would be no economy as far as Afghanistan is concerned. It will have serious impact on the neighboring countries. The neighboring countries, despite the fact that Pakistan and others are saying that we will not like to interfere and we will not like to get messed up in Afghanistan's affairs, but the fact remains that the spillover effect would definitely impact on all these countries, and they have to take preventive measures and to see to it. So there could also be a sort of a conflict of interest. And then the point that you raised about India, obviously Indians are extremely concerned because they have never developed any relationship with the Taliban. It has been a very adversarial relation.
Have they ever thought about this current possibility, sir?
They did in the later stages, when they realized that the Taliban were making huge progress and inroads into Afghanistan. They did try to also make contact with the Taliban leadership.
But they refused.
But you see, the Taliban are also very intelligent and very smart guys. They have also tried to sort of make contact with the Indians, and will try to get as best from them as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because you see, the thing about Taliban is that they are always inward looking. They are not trying to sort of have any influence in outside countries. All they want is to sort of have real, genuine...
No ambition outside the borders of Afghanistan.
This is one major characteristic of the Taliban.
Unlike the IS and the other non-state actors.
Absolutely. So it's very much Afghan-based. And anything which is good for Afghanistan, they will try to promote that. Now, of course, the negative side of the Taliban is their philosophy and their ideology. So, I mean, at least from the people who believe in democracy, who believe in the human rights, who believe in the freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. So to that extent, I think, it is up to the people of Afghanistan to decide as to what sort of a future.
But that is a very important point, General Sahab. If you allow me, sir, we've been joined in by Michael Kugelman.
Yeah, sure.
And let's see what Kugelman has to share with us. Thank you very much, Michael, for taking out the time and talking to PTV World. Now, the situation in Afghanistan seems to be very fluid. A lot of people say that there is going to be a civil war-like situation. I believe it has already started. Look at what is happening not only in one district or two districts, it's almost all over. Talk about North, talk about South, talk about the West. First of all, sir, I'm sure you must have heard the press conference of the US President. I mean, I fail to understand what sort of an input he has been given earlier by the Pentagon or otherwise, because he still believes that the Afghanistan, they do not have any future in Afghanistan. The government of Kabul is stable and they have the capacity to stay on. Then he says that the Afghan forces are well equipped and perhaps they have all the input, to fight back. I mean, what is going on in Afghanistan and what the president is saying? I mean, there seems to be an absolute conflict of interest. Your take, sir?
Great to be here with you. I
Michael.
think that yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir, please.
Yeah, Afghanistan is embroiled in a civil war right now, so I agree with you. I mean, the fact that you have almost half of the country's districts under Taliban control, that's an indication of a civil war. The fact that you have militias rising up across the country to take on the Taliban because they don't trust their own government to do that, that's an indication of a civil war. So, in terms of President Biden and, where he's coming from, he's under no illusions as to how bad and alarming the situation is in Afghanistan. But, keep in mind that when he announced his decision to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, he was making that decision not based on the state or the projected state of the insurgency. He made that decision based on his perception of the threat of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan to the United States, not within Afghanistan, but to the United States. So this is why, with the insurgency getting completely out of control in recent weeks, with the violence intensifying, despite that, he's been essentially picking up, increasing the pace of the withdrawal. The optics are quite dreadful, but from a policy standpoint, it's very consistent with what he wants to do. I mean, he has concluded that the terrorism threat in Afghanistan is not sufficiently threatening to the U.S. to warrant U.S. troops staying on the ground. So he's taken a very narrowly focused approach to Afghanistan and based his decision on something that has little to do with the tenor and the intensity of the insurgency itself.
When he says that the Afghan people must decide about their own future, earlier they wanted democracy to prevail there, they wanted Taliban to be smoked out of the mountains, they wanted to go after Al-Qaeda, but after 20 years, after investing trillions of dollars, losing around 3,000 of their own soldiers, and killing, God knows, 1 million people, perhaps God knows what the right number is, but so many people using all sorts of weapons, including the mother of all bombs. What have they achieved? Just primarily, do you believe that post 9/11 the agenda wasn't to eliminate Al-Qaeda or Taliban? Because after 20 years, they have come up with more strength. But what the Americans perhaps wanted at that time was to keep a check on Iran, China, Chinese expansion plan perhaps, and the Russians, philosophy of coming down to the warm waters, because the equation was changing and perhaps Pakistan was also, thinking otherwise.
Yeah, well, I think that unfortunately U.S. success stopped in Afghanistan within a few months after U.S. forces entered the country, because, as you know, the initial goals were achieved quite quickly, and that, of course, was to eliminate the Al-Qaeda sanctuaries and to remove their Taliban hosts from power. And I think one of the many reasons why we've seen these U.S. failures in Afghanistan over the last nearly 20 years is that you have not had any U.S. government that has been able to clearly articulate what the U.S. strategy is in Afghanistan beyond those initial counterterrorism goals that, again, were achieved very early on in the war. And I know that, and this sort of creates a lot of opportunities for people to speculate as to why the U.S. was really there. Was it to secure the drug trade? Was it to push back against China? It was none of those things, in my view. My own sense is that the mission had always been seen through a counterterrorism lens, but then there also was a time, particularly when the U.S. was surging troops into Afghanistan in 2010 and 2011, where the objective was to try to tame the insurgency and weaken it enough so that the Taliban would be willing to enter talks with the Afghan government to end the war. But clearly, that objective didn't work. It failed miserably, as we know. You had more than 150,000 NATO troops in Afghanistan in 2011 at the height of the surge, which was about 2 times the number of Taliban troops, Taliban fighters at the least, and that didn't work. So, I think that all the U.S. is left with now is to try to maintain this narrowly defined focus on counterterrorism goals, which is why, the main U.S. goal at this point, other than finishing up the troop withdrawal, is to try to figure out ways to maintain some semblance of a counterterrorism capacity over the horizon, so to speak, so that it can continue to pursue those goals without boots on the ground.
All right. Now, last quick comment, Michael. It's a very straight question regarding the role of the Indians. Do you think they will also change their strategy in Afghanistan, or you believe their role has diminished, or perhaps one of the choice they have, because they have signed veto with the Americans, sharing of the bases, sharing of the intelligence, sharing of the equipment, and so much more. Do you believe there is any chance that the Indians might offer the Americans to place their assets, or rather to keep an eye through Jammu and Kashmir Air Force Base?
I know that one could think that perhaps India would be a logical counterterrorism partner for the U.S. vis-a-vis Afghanistan, just because, it's the U.S.'s closest partner in the region. But I think that there would be a lot of logistical risks of doing that. For all we talk about the growth in the U.S.-India relationship, India continues to resist any type of alliance-like behavior in its relationship with the U.S. I'm not sure it would want to partner militarily with the U.S. In that way. But I think that the Indian policy in Afghanistan already has changed. The fact that you now have had official, formal efforts by New Delhi to try to reach out to the Taliban and launch contacts with the Taliban. That's a big change. I mean, as was noted previously, I think in the past you'd had some informal efforts by retired Indian diplomats to participate in meetings with the Taliban, but nothing like what you have now. Why is India doing this? Well, it's quite simple. India was sort of slow to respond, to realize this, but India now recognizes, it's read the writing on the wall, it recognizes that no matter what happens in Afghanistan, post-U.S. withdrawal, the Taliban is only going to get stronger. And so I think it's recognized that it has no choice but to try to broaden its array of contacts in Afghanistan beyond Kabul and beyond the broader political class, so that it expands to the Taliban as well, because the Taliban is potent and it will become even more potent after the withdrawal, whether the war continues or whether there's a peace process.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your input. Now, Jan Saab, that's a neutral version. And Michael believes that the Taliban will get stronger and stronger. If perhaps the current number is 75,000, let's admit if it is going to multiply. They will have more power, and obviously the support from the Russians is very, very, obvious factor there as well, because they have sort of, in a way told them that don't worry, nothing is going to happen to your softer belly out there. What's the future? A lot of people believe that if there is a warlike situation, and he says that it has already started and it is going to get worse, the refugees coming in from the Afghan side towards Pakistan or Iran perhaps, sir, do you see that happening? Because according to our own agencies, they believe that the number could be between 500,000 to 700,000. Some of the people believe that only through Chaman it could be more than 1 million if things get really worse. Are we in a position to manage that? Do we have a contingency plan? You think the government is thinking on those lines as well, sir?
Well, certainly the government must be thinking, and I think they are taking certain measures. The military is taking certain measures. It has that vision, it has that experience of the past. It cannot be ignoring all this. It's definitely in the knowledge of our authorities. That aside, the fact remains there are two things that I would like to mention here. One is that the Taliban are already, for a long period now, for many months or years, I would say, have been in control of the south and the east of Afghanistan. So, although I think that there will be an influx of refugees, but would there be such a large influx of refugees on this side? Because Taliban have already been in control of these areas for so many months and years. So there is no difference whatsoever, and there is no fight that is going on in these areas per se. The real fight is going on in the areas which are controlled by the Northern Alliance, and in those areas. But nonetheless, people will, Afghans will flow into, try to come to Pakistan. There is no doubt about it. But the numbers will not be as many. That is the point I'm trying to make. But Pakistan has already taken several measures.
For example?
Like for instance,
fence?
Fencing the area. I mean, it was one of the...
Will it help,
It was like a miracle.
Sir, will it help? Don't you think that is going to be the bone of contention between the Taliban, if they form a government, and Pakistan also?
No, I wouldn't say that, because I think the Taliban understand...
They do not recognize your Durrani line.
Well, and there are many who think that, and despite the, the fencing, that Afghans will be able to come into Pakistan very easily, because there is such little difference between the tribes that live on the other.
So we're going to be the hosts once again.
Once again. So that is there. Pakistan is, I think, mentally and otherwise also prepared for that, although it will have a negative impact because our economy is already under stress. It will further burden our economy.
Plus COVID issue.
Well, I think COVID is also a very major issue, because I don't think these people have been, vaccinated.
And that Delta virus is already in Afghanistan, by the way.
So there are many other ill effects that could take place. But I think whatever precautions Pakistan has to take, it should be taking. And if it hasn't, then it must take. But it is also a great stress and drain on Pakistan's meager resources. And is the international community in a position to help or understand the predicament of Pakistan? is it prepared to help Pakistan or not? That is also one aspect of it. Instead of continuing to criticize Pakistan, I think they should realize and that it is their wrong policies, the spillover of which Pakistan has to bear.
Correct.
So they must really help Pakistan at this point of time. Are the UN agencies also really looking at this aspect? I have a feeling that they may be, but they need to sort of really tell us what exactly do they have in mind.
But sir, the kind of equation currently which we have with the United States of America, forget about the statement issued by Ned Price. That's very, very, I would say, diplomatic kind of statement. But sir, in reality, do you think the UN, which is obviously, I would say, financed by the Americans in one way or the other, they'll be able to do all that? Because it seems that Pakistan has been left alone because they believe that we are in a different group altogether, sir.
No, I think they should realize that if something, if Pakistan is in turbulence, if Pakistan becomes chaotic, if these areas become unmanageable, the ones which are bordering Afghanistan, it will have a very adverse impact, at the regional and at the global level, which has been the history,
Yeah.
So I think they have a responsibility. So I would look at it in this way that I think the Americans, irrespective of what policies they were pursuing, they have to understand that there is a human aspect to all this.
And it is indeed,
there
yes.
is also a security aspect to all this, and it cannot be just ignored.
All right. Now, Shahid, a couple of points. I mean, when we look at the international policy towards Kabul, we always talk about, because the narratives are set by the Western world, so their perspective has an edge as compared to what the Russians or the Chinese or this part or the Asians say, let's put it this way. This conflict of interest is going to be the issue and a half again in the future. Do you think, don't you believe that this is the time that they should, all these countries should sit with or without the Taliban and come up with some sort of a policy and present that to the Taliban and say, listen, this is how you need to move forward. Otherwise, there's going to be a chaos, because at the end of the day, somebody has to finance Afghanistan. It could be Americans. They have pledged about $3 billion a year, I guess. Is that enough? If not, what would be the role of the Russians and the Chinese, the bigger economies, the bigger countries?
I think, look, first of all, there's one major point that we need to understand. Michael Kugelman referred to Afghanistan as the country is already at civil war. We have to deconstruct that narrative, as you've stated that the Western media has a stronger edge when it comes to narrative shaping.
And it's a reality.
So
yes.
let's deconstruct that narrative. What it means, who is creating conditions for civil war in Afghanistan? When the Doha process happened, what Pakistan stated was that all regional countries and Western countries should come together and do exactly what you've just stated. They should strike a deal that will transfer power from the current government into an interim setup, followed by a peace deal where a national unity government will be formed in Afghanistan and no violence will take place. It will include a ceasefire, it will include guarantees, but the Americans did not let that happen. It is as if though some people state that they are creating conditions for a civil war because it kind of feeds into their longer term geostrategic objectives in Afghanistan and in the region at large. Number one. Number two, when the Western-backed government in Kabul is not yielding to the formation of a national unity government or an interim setup or a peace deal with the Taliban, regardless of what's the process that is currently taking place in Russia, regardless of the process that is currently taking place in Iran, regardless of the process that is due to take place at any time in the future in Turkey. The Western-backed government is not yielding. They are deliberately creating conditions for civil war. They're instigating local militias, as Michael Kugelman stated, to quote-unquote rise up against the Taliban. But one would ask the question, if the NATO militaries have not succeeded against the Taliban, are militias poorly equipped and armed militias are going to succeed against the Taliban on the battlefield? It is not going to happen. So in Pakistan's narrative has been very clear that all regional countries, including China, including Russia, including Iran, including Turkey, and Western powers, they should come together and they should form an alliance. If not an alliance, they should form a deal that should transition Afghanistan peacefully into a national unity government model, which is not happening. So there is a clear conflict of interest.
Will that be a democratic model? Do you think if proper, free, fair and transparent elections are held? Because that is, I believe that the Ashraf Ghani government is in problem.
It is a huge problem.
Right?
Yes.
Let's suppose if he flies back to United States of America. He goes there. What would be the future of Abdullah, the Northern Alliance in particular, because Ahmad Shah Masood's brother and his son both are pretty active in politics at the moment.
Yes.
And secondly, when you talk about the power of the Taliban versus the non-state actors, do you think these would consider the non-state actors as the local rebels or anti-Afghan or rather anti-Taliban elements? There could be a Syria-like situation then?
Look, I think the way I see it is that the Americans are leaving a moth-eaten Afghanistan behind. So there's no structure that could hold the country together. So Afghanistan still is a country that is deeply divided along ethnic lines. And if there is a national unity government, it would have to be a government of convenience, because Abdullah has a lot of following in his own constituency. The Taliban have their own constituency, and there are a lot of other players. So I believe that a national unity government in Afghanistan would be a loose alliance between warring factions, and they would have to agree to a set of principles. And if that happens, Afghanistan will avoid a civil war and Pakistan will avoid another refugee crisis. But the chances of that happening are pretty low, because the global powers, it seems as if the Americans are deliberately trying to create conditions that could lead to a civil war in Afghanistan, because Pakistan has consistently been telling the Americans, communicating with the Americans, that we have to find a solution before you actually leave and transition out of the country. You can't just simply say, good luck, we are leaving. You switch the lights off in Bagram Air Base.
This is exactly what they did.
I mean, they didn't even tell the Afghan government. They didn't even tell the Afghan government there was no transition of base. There was no transition ceremony. They simply switched off the lights and left. I mean, is this a right way of behaving as a superpower? It is not. I mean, this is against established international norms.
There was no transfer of power to the general who's looking after the affairs, the Afghan general.
He looked quite perplexed in a recent interview he gave to the international media. But he stated that we had absolutely no idea that Americans were going to leave, and it actually opened the base to ransackers and looters who got there before the Afghan National Army did, and they actually plundered
there are more than 1,000 vehicles there, sir. Civilian vehicles as well as the Humvees. And
3.5 million items have been identified on that base,
including the food, the water bottles, and everything. Yeah.
So this is not how you behave in an international setting.
They practically ran away.
They practically ran away.
And now, one more important point. I mean, when we read this story that the Russians they are going to activate the Tajik military base. I mean, the fact that the Americans have gone. What is that supposed to mean?
So Russians have a brigade in Tajikistan around Fakhror and Aini air bases. 2 years ago, I wrote an article in which I predicted that such a situation can happen, where the Russian military can provide certain assistance to the Taliban in order to suppress
Don't
ISIS.
You think it's already going on?
It is already happening, because look, Russians are extremely worried about
Perhaps
this.
one of the reasons that the northern side is being invaded by the Taliban, perhaps tell us quite a lot. That there is some sort of a support from that side.
There is definitely an element of cooperation between the Russian state and the Taliban, because primary concern for Russia, as far as security is concerned, is ISIS-KP, because they have been planning to conduct attacks into Russia. Russian mainland from Afghanistan, and they've had bases in Afghanistan. They have been neutralized to a large extent. There have been fighting between Afghan Taliban and the Daesh or ISIS militants. So there's certain cooperation between the Russian state and the Taliban in order to stem the flow of the ISIS militants, who are incidentally supported by the Afghan intelligence itself. So a very important incident happened about a year ago when the Afghan Taliban and ISIS were fighting. The Afghan National Army actually airlifted over 500 Daesh fighters back to Kabul in American-supplied helicopters.
So your former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai Saab, has always been talking about the mystery helicopters. I mean, how come those people who were fighting in Syria ended up in Afghanistan? They can't walk all the way via Iran. The point is that there's something going on. There is a bigger proxy war. Now, General Saab, since a couple of minutes are left, I just want your opinion on the future. You think things are going to get worse from here? Or perhaps there are certain countries that they have a certain level of leverage or perhaps an influence on the Taliban, where they can be asked, or perhaps they could be persuaded to sort of look after the affairs, but not the way at the way we were watching it at the moment, sir?
You see, I think the Taliban leadership would be interested in sort of peace and stability in Afghanistan. There is no doubt about that. But obviously, one thing is that you would like to have that, but are you taking certain measures to promote that or not is a big question.
Absolutely.
So, but I think it would be in their interest as well, because if they are going to run a state and be responsible, be the major political party and the major military force in Afghanistan, then they will have to see to it that they move towards stability.
All right.
And the only way that they can move towards stability is by having a political dialogue with the other forces and try to develop an understanding,
And that
in
is
which
the way forward.
countries like Pakistan, Iran and others will definitely help, and that would be the right direction. So let's hope for the best.
Well, let's hope for the best, but I think the couple of months, perhaps till September, let's put it this way, they'll be very interesting. The situation in Afghanistan is going to remain fluid, but it's going to be till, let's see, sanity prevails there. We don't want to see any bloodshed out there, so at the end of the day, it's a Muslim brother country and our neighbor. Thank you so much, Al Saab. It was a pleasure having you, Shahid. Thank you so much for your presence as well. That's all we have for this hour. I'll see you again next week. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Have a great weekend. Khuda Hafiz.